Hi, I'm Cindy with Phil's Virtual Sewing Club. The holidays are approaching and I'd like to share with you a project that we can use to decorate our holiday table. This project is easy and it allows us to be creative with our fabric choices to match our holiday decor. To create my holiday placemat, I used the June Tailor Quilt-As-You-Go Venice placemats. This is a pre-printed panel. It comes with 6. The first thing I did was cut 6 apart, giving myself enough room around each one. I cut my backing piece, put the pretty side down. I used my 505 temporary spray, sprayed the back of the pre-printed panel, and then smoothed it down. Following the instruction sheet, I then cut each of the pieces following the dimensions provided in the instructions and make sure I labeled them so I could keep track of what piece was what. So now we're going to use the center needle straight stitch, which on my Solaris is 1-03, and I'm going to use my left-right shift to achieve a perfect 1/4" seam. Now I'm using any measuring tool with a 1/4" mark will work with this. We're going to set our measuring tool under our presser foot, the J foot, so that the ruler is right along the edge of the J foot. We're going to use our left-right shift to move the needle so it is right exactly at that 1/4" mark. You can kind of turn the hand wheel to lower to make sure if you're having trouble seeing that. But right now I'm set. If I use my fabric at the edge of my J foot, it's going to give me a perfect 1/4" seam allowance. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to position our number 1 piece face up. So the pretty side's up, and I'm going to lay it right along the lines on my pre-printed panel. The next thing I want to do is I want to take my pre-cut piece number 2 and I want to put that pretty side down along the number 2 line. So I've got that lined up, and you can either pin or just hold in place. I'm going to place a pin just through the batting in these pieces. And now I'm ready to sew my first 1/4" seam. Because I set my piece to achieve the 1/4" seam from the edge of the foot, I'm going to use the edge of my J foot and follow the seam. Because I don't want my bobbin thread on the back, I'm going to pull up my bobbin thread before I start stitching that seam. So I'm going to use my needle down, needle up, and then I'm going to pull up my bobbin thread to the top side. There we go. I'm going to reposition to the right at the line, and I'm going to sew my 1/4" seam. And I'm going to sew off, and it doesn't matter since this won't show on the back, so I can use my automatic needle threader at this point. After stitching that 1/4" seam, I'm going to use my roller press tool, and I'm going to press the seam open making sure that's laying nice and flat. Now we're ready for our piece number 3. We want to make sure that this piece is lining up. So we're going to put it pretty side down over the other piece, lining up along this line. I'll place a pin. And then I'm making sure I'm lining up the right side of my J foot with the end of the pattern piece. I'll stitch my 1/4 inch seam. And I'm going to stop with my needle down right on the line. I'll bring my needle up, raise my presser foot, and now I can pull up my bobbin thread to the top side. And trim. Now what we're going to do is open this up and use our rolling pressing iron to press that seam open. And if you can notice, this is running right along the line for number 3. And we're going to continue on and go to number 4, 5, 6, 7 to complete this midsection braid. The last piece was stitched, number 12. I'm going to use my roller to press that up. Now, we've got a lot of these excess pieces hanging over, so the next step is to take it to our cutting table so that we can trim all these pieces off. Okay, so the next step is to draw a line so that we can eliminate these little tails. So if you could see, there's a little extension to this line here, and I just took my friction pen and extended out on both sides so I could draw a better line. And I'm gonna place that right on my lines and use my friction pen to draw the lines. So now I have a line to trim that. And then we're going to do that also, we're going to repeat that process for the other side so that we have nice, clean, trimmed lines. Another option when doing a 1/4 inch seam is to use a 1/4 inch foot. Now there's a 1/4 inch foot here, and I would ride my raw edge along this part right here, and that's going to give me a 1/4 inch seam allowance using that center needle position. And there's also a 1/4 inch foot with a little guide. It has got a little flange here that you would ride the raw edge of your fabric using the center needle position also along that flange, and it kind of keeps you from going over that that area there. So we're gonna sew number 13 down. We trimmed our edge, all the excess fabric, and now we're gonna put right sides down along the line 13 and 14 and sew our 1/4 inch seam. We're gonna start off the edge and matching the raw edge with the edge of this foot right here. Now we're going to press that seam open. And then the next step would be to do the 16. And we're going to put right sides together. Lay it along that line. And stitch our 1/4 inch seam. And this is going to overlap just a little bit. That does not matter. It's going to be in the seam allowance. And you'll continue with the other side also. We'll press this open. And then we're going to follow the same for 13 and 15 on this side. And then we're going to proceed to doing the 17A and the B. The next step would be to put 17B and 17A along the placement lines. But if you're going to do any embroidery or applique, now is the time that you'd want to do this while this piece is open. So it tells you to fold this in half. But if you're going to do embroidery, what you want to do is position it between this fold line up here and the bottom, and you want to center your embroidery applique right here. At this time, we're not going to do any embroidery, so we're going to keep the fold line, and it's actually going to be positioned right here. So you want to lay it on this line, but put it over on the stitching line, on the placement line here. So you want this to extend out right here, and then we're going to take our 17A piece and lay that down right on the placement line, and then we're going to place a couple pins in here so they don't move. I had the pins here. Okay. And then we're going to stitch our 1/4 inch seam. And now we'll flip the 17A and 17B. That makes your pocket, and we're going to finger press it. At this point in time, if you want to take it to your iron and press everything down, and then if you wish, you can use a basting stitch around the edges of your placemat, trim it, and then add your quilt binding. Now the first thing I did before I started sewing on the binding, and as I folded down a 1/4 inch approximately on the edge, the raw edge of my bias binding. So I'm going to place this, and then I'm going to start about 1 inch or 2 down from the edge, and then I'm using my 1/4 inch foot. I'm going to stitch my binding on, stopping a 1/4 inch from the end. Okay. Now I can angle this and stitch right off to the corner. Now to create my miter, I'm going to fold up at a 90-degree angle my binding and then fold it back on itself, making sure that my edges are even. Then I'm going to rotate my fabric, place it under my presser foot, and then stitch my 1/4 inch seam along this edge. Now I started in an inconspicuous spot up here because nobody's going to see this part, and right now I'm going to go over my folded edge. So I did place a couple pins here to keep that from shifting. So I'm going to sew my seam here. And I'm coming along to the pocket. And if you see, we're coming to the end here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that I trim this piece so that the short end is going to be covering this. So I'm going to trim. We're going to make sure it's covering in here. So I'm going to hold my fabric down. And I'm just going to place this inside right here. And stitch it down. Make sure this is all nice and flat. Make sure that doesn't shift in there. So you want to make sure it's meeting right up here. And now we've got our miter corner here and everything matches beautifully. Now what we'll do is we'll press this open, flip it around to the back, and then hand stitch this backing down. Now with the bias binding on, our project is complete. We've got a beautiful placemat, a little pocket for our utensils, and you can be creative as you want to be. Here is a monogram initial using the Kimberbell embroidery leather. That turned out very nice. And you also you can go ahead and quilt. Each section here has got a little bit of different quilting. You can practice your free motion quilting skills, or you can do use rulers for quilting. And here is another option. I've got some embroidery on a Christmas, some little built-in designs, or you can use any designs. And this is using a little bit of metallic look to glitz it up. You may purchase this pattern and all of the notions used in this video from Phil's Sewing Machines. Thank you for watching and supporting Phil's Sewing Machines. If there's something you would like to see in a future video, please contact Larry or Annette and let them know.